They're a regional spinal therapy center of excellence. So we're very fortunate to have him, and if you'd like to supplement your introduction, I would appreciate it too. I'm ready to
Well,
start.
are you guys OTs and PTs? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, hello New Orleans, hello Big Easy, put down those hurricanes, put down that gumbo spoon. So I gather everybody's in New Orleans, but so I have worked at Sharp Rehab for, I hesitate to tell you, 30 years actually. First with inpatients and more recently with outpatients. And it's been a great place for me actually to work, and people say, Howie, can you do it? And the truth is that we have people come in very, very disabled, very dependent, and very out of control of their lives, and we help them get the control back and help them restart their lives. So, I mean, that's the essence of it, I suppose. But just to give you an idea of what that's about, once a year we have, Sharp does this Victories of Spirit Award, where we give about 4 awards to people that have been through rehab, or some part of our rehab, and have kind of got their lives going again, and in some, usually there's the criteria of giving something back to the disabled community. And I thought this is a fellow, Ryan Baker, who I think he's probably about 18 years post-injury, and he won last year, and I just wanted to show it to you to get, so you get the flavor of it. He's also a key member of a men's group that I run. I run a mainly outpatient group of men. I have about, gosh, must be close to 100 SCI guys on my mailing list, and they exchange information. I'm a Luddite myself, but I know enough to do that bit. And I usually get about 10 people each group, do it twice a month, and usually a different cast of characters. And there's an interesting thing that came up that I'll talk to you about after we do this. And then I was going to talk about adjustment theories about adjusting to spinal cord injury psychologically, and some of the theories, which none of them are perfect, but they do help kind of put a framework to what you're doing as PTs, OTs, or social workers, nurses that are working with spinal cord. Sometimes they're helpful to see what stage people are in. So I'm just going to play this, if possible.
It's on play now. And let's take it off of mute.
Oh, right.
Isaiah, it says, they shall mount up like wings on eagles. They shall walk and not grow weary. They shall run and not grow faint. I said, how appropriate that this award for you has been given out of a scripture that was our verse from the onset of the accident.
I was up all night at the school-sponsored grad night, and we had a casino and a dance floor and a theme, and like Jamaica me crazy, Mon. And it was a blast. So the plan was that the morning after grad night, my family and I were caravanning to Steamboat Springs, Colorado. We were on the road for maybe an hour and a half, and the person driving the vehicle that I was in fell asleep at the wheel. It's amazing how one random split second can change your entire life.
And then I walked into the gurney where they had Ryan, and he's laying there, my beautiful firstborn son, with the tears coming down his eyes.
And it was June 20th at 10 o'clock in the morning, the day after I graduated from high school, and I'm laying in the ICU.
This was a young man at 19 who will never walk again. He put his finger in my face and he says, now Mom, you of all people know this is what God had planned for my life. And he set that tone. And that's not to say that we didn't cry, and that's not to say that even today my heart breaks. Like, God, why didn't you take my legs? I'd lived my life. But he knew Ryan's heart, and he knew who Ryan was going to be in the chair.
Ryan saw this change in his life as a new challenge.
I didn't really have any doubt about God's plan for my life.
Makes me feel proud to be his brother. He's a good guy, you know, he cares, he has a caring heart. He's always had a caring heart.
My brother is my best friend.
They're almost like twins because they are that close. They love each other very, very much. And this was really hard for Aaron to see his brother be injured like he was. But Aaron also knew that if anybody could do it, Ryan was the one to do it.
He just kept pushing through. You don't finish the elephant all at once, one bite at a time, you know?
July 8th, 1991, I was admitted to Sheriff Memorial Hospital's spinal cord rehab. And you are now in a place that is going to give you everything that you need to fill up your toolbox. So when you leave, you have everything in your box that you're going to need to survive out in the real world.
And Ryan is a perfect example of that.
Everyone there was amazing. Steve was someone to look at and think, wow.
So I try and give them all the same options that are, of course, appropriate and realistic within their disability. And the way the person picks it up and runs with it from there is where the real key is. And that's where Ryan is a special guy.
Steve taught me that it is not how strong you are, but it's how you go about doing it.
But I have to be realistic to know that when that person's laying in their bed at night, they're not thinking, geez, am I going to water ski when I get out of here? Am I going to jet? They're thinking, am I going to have a life? Am I going to be able to work? Am I going to have a relationship? What about my family? Those are the real issues at hand.
I just looked up to this guy who appeared to be more disabled than me, but is doing all of these incredible things from his chair, you know, and what a powerful example he was for me. I got myself into a racing chair and competitively raced my first wheelchair race and my first 10K before my 1-year anniversary.
The injury happened in June. He was skiing in April in a sit chair like he'd been born in it.
But he would go into snowboard parks and go off these huge jumps and twist his body in a sit ski and do like 360s in a sit ski.
You know, sit skiers weren't really seen in Steamboat. And people would come up and think that he rented the sit ski for the mountain. And people would honestly come up and go, where did you rent that? Where'd you get that? Because he was so good on it. And they thought it was like a carnival ride or something. He goes, well, let me tell you how you can get one.
He just was never really afraid to keep on going.
It was more about, I'm leaving this chair behind, and I'm getting in this, and I'm gonna go escape for 2 or 3 hours.
Most of the time, I am in awe. Of him.
But really, for me, the magic happens when you realize a light bulb goes on. I can make a difference here. I can help this person do this, or I can at least
maybe I can't help them do this, but I can help them realize that they can do it.
So he's always been there for other people.
I think it's just his love for people, and Ryan, I think, loves to reach out to people because he doesn't want to see people hurting.
Ryan really is an amazing person. I don't think I've ever known anyone who can establish rapport so quickly and so easily with people. And what I notice about Ryan is that when he's speaking with patients, he's never talking at them, he only talks with them.
And then you go up to the Sharps Rehab where these young, precious lives get destroyed. And he wants to be a part of building them back up and encouraging them because life has not stopped. Your mode of transportation has. You just go for it. You go for it. You don't quit. And you reach out and you help people wherever they're at.
Ryan, being the special guy he is, he just started a brand new sport in the community in wheelchair lacrosse.
We did a lot of research on the internet, made some phone calls, actually reached out to US Lacrosse in Baltimore, and just tried to figure out the best way to go about growing this thing from the ground up and trying to grow this to be big enough to take it to the Paralympic Committee and try and get this thing on an international level.
And I just know that there's going to be big things ahead for him. I mean, it's just starting for him.
I work at a place here in town called Ability Center. It's a place for me to be and earn a living and still be involved in my community. His life has transcended this injury. I can love, and I can allow myself to be loved. And I think that that's an incredibly powerful thing.
I've never seen Ryan so happy. And I love this young woman that God's brought into his life to become his wife. But on their wedding invitation, they wrote, "Beyond happy." And I'm beyond proud of this young man.
I'm proud to be his dad. He does walk taller than any man that I know.
Our life lesson is never give up. Always have hope.
He can do anything he wants. I think sometimes Ryan's more able than I am. So I think that if there was something that Ryan wanted to do, Ryan can do it.
Anything is possible.
That's our faith. That's how he inspires me, because he keeps going.
I have every confidence in a bright, beautiful, loving future.
Here's to the heroes, those who move mountains. Here's to the mirror.
So the other 3 or 4 people were just as inspiring, but not spinal cord injured. So, you know, I was interviewed for this on Ryan, and I said, you know, the thing about Ryan, I see him talking, you know, when he's talking with other people doing peer support, he talks with them. He doesn't talk at them. And our medical director, as you can see, stole that line and put it himself. Not that it's about that ego or anything like that.
And then you had nothing to say after since it was Carl?
No, I'm cutting the floor completely. Yeah.
Will this just play for the-
It should do, yeah, great.
But this can either be played or not played. That is. I got a message on here that says
The real heartfelt stuff gets hashed out and worked through in the men's group. And I was thinking about it, that actually it doesn't, and I was thinking about it coming up here, and the fact is everybody adjusts at a different rate, and the men that in this group, they really don't actually tolerate people or they don't want to hear people whining about their situation. So I think in one of the models there's a stage called withdrawal, and naturally when people first go home, you know, we used to have a quad for 6 months when I started, and a para maybe for 3 or 4 months. Now it's down to like 5 or 6 weeks and 3 or 4 weeks. So the therapists are really good at getting people almost as ready as they used to in that amount of time. But as far as the psychosocial adjustment and kind of incorporating what's happened to them, that usually happens when they go home. And as you can imagine, one of the big sticking points in a town like this is transportation. Transportation is really difficult, and it takes people a while to get their own vehicle, oftentimes. And most of the people that come to the group are people in their own vehicles, and therefore further down the road and probably better, more adjusted. I always wanted to do some research on how well people adjust just using that one variable, how soon they get their own vehicle, and they can be away from other, you know, depending on other people in that way. Because I think it might be a significant result that it helps that much. So we have a fairly advanced recreation therapy. I mean, a big program with a lot of activities going on. And a few years back, they switched from focusing on inpatients to focusing on outpatient programs, like sponsoring quad rugby, which is a wonderful game, and now Brian's starting this game. But having people that are down the road coming back into rehab, so that people that are new to the program can see people that have adjusted. Steve Cal, the other spinal cord guy in there, is a rec therapist, as you probably could gather, actually. But so we also have several of the guys that come to my group that have been trained as peer support volunteers, because it's actually been shown in research that the more degrees counselors have, the less effective they are. And most people, there's a debate I've had with Steve Cal, actually, where I always said, you know, we give people a choice. Do you want to talk to somebody with a similar level of injury? And 50% of the time they'll say no. They're just not ready to identify, if you will, with the disability at the point when they're inpatients. And Steve says that's fine, but a year from now they'll say, I wish I'd said yes. So now the people that don't particularly want their own peer support volunteer, where we try and hook up somebody with a similar injury and maybe a similar cultural, socio-economic, whatever background, the people that don't necessarily, that refuse, we have these guys with volunteer badges that can cruise around, at least make contact with them and do it that way. I'm just going to outline some. Okay.
Over this. There's a little remote, but I don't know where the
We
remote
have to
is.
make sure that mouse is on his powerful side first.
Great, thank you very much. So, these are the learning objectives. Usually I do this with Kathy Dunn, so I think you'll be getting her later, not today, but usually we go back to back. And she worked at Sharp Rehab for my first 10 years, and since then she's been the clinical nurse educator at the VA, and she knows more about spinal cord injury than any physiatrist or doctor or I've ever come across. It's been her life. So these are the learning objectives. So this is the first one. I actually have come across another one since I made this that I'm going to give only you. The people who went to New Orleans will not get this last outline unless you're nice enough to do it. But so this is a theory that was quite well liked some years ago, and it still holds some water, I think. It's based on Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who you may recognize that name. She did a lot of research into people that are diagnosed with terminal cancer and the stages they go through in preparing for death, and that this was applied, obviously after a traumatic injury, the denial. Nearly everybody that comes into rehab says, I'm walking out of here. Yeah, just about everybody, I would say, says, I'm going to be walking out of here. And everybody knows somebody that's been told, you're not going to walk. And they prove them wrong. So, so we don't want to dispel that myth. I mean, it's only if the person says, look, I don't need to learn how to do transfers because I'm walking out of here, then it becomes a problem. But I kind of tell people to, have two sets of goals. That's your goal, to walk out of here, and then you've got to be, anything you do functionally right now is going to get you towards that goal. So, and denial allows people to, to kind of access their pre-injury coping, and goodness knows have the energy to put themselves into therapy because, otherwise they'd be saying, roll me up, sort of thing. But so denial. In response to Anne's email that I just described to you, I think you could almost make a case that that people in chairs, the ones that do the best, are continually using denial. I mean, I think it's even though they've gone through the process, they're not thinking about the difficult stuff. Interestingly, some guys in my group, we were talking about stem cell research, and a couple of guys said, and there was general agreement on this, that they could take the chair, they're used to the chair, but if they could just take care of bowel and bladder, those issues, they could live with that, and I guess that would include sexuality too, which I won't go into today. I do the class on sexuality at Sharp, but I know Kathy is going to do a big thing on that. So, bargaining, you'll often see a quad saying, okay, look, I'm getting my fingers back. If I can just get my arms back, my hands, I can live with that. Anger, often, I always tell people that are in relationships, look, there's a tendency to get angry at people you love, obviously, we've all heard that, it's safe to do that. Or they'll get angry at staff, it's one or the other. But sometimes when you're first injured, you feel so unacceptable in your new self that you push the people that really care about you, away till they throw up their hands. And so I try and get people to guard against that, especially people that haven't been in a relationship very long. There's a high incidence of those relationships not making it, as you can imagine. The significant others that says, this isn't the deal I made. And so I would say the more successful relationships, like Ryan's, they're a year into their marriage, I guess, so they said it wouldn't last. So I think a relationship where the spouse or the partner is meeting the person, knows what they're getting, so it seems to be more successful. But a lot of couples do make it too. So anger, the one thing I wanted to say is that OTs and PTs are, in a rehab setting, and certainly psychotherapists, that you're dealing with the thing they most want back, function, and so you end up in that role that often people are more comfortable talking to a therapist than to a social worker or anybody else.
So we need to be equipped.
You need to be equipped, yeah. And I think that's what Anne is saying. She's something of a bit of a control freak, and she wants to have it understand completely what's going on. And people often do what they're going to do, no matter how much you counsel them. But it's not surprising that a lot of people have had their first relationship after an injury with either a nurse or a therapist, because you don't have to explain everything to them, because they know what's going on. And there's a tremendous bond that develops, and it's often difficult for the therapist to, you can't be completely distant, but you can have enough distance, or you won't be helpful if you're distant, but you've got to sometimes have to draw some boundaries, because people will really be drawn to you in that thing. So depression, sadness, grief obviously happens, and then acceptance was her thing, but I think adjustment is more likely. The most best adjusted guys, if they come up with a stem cell, I think will be first in line. So it's not that they've completely accepted it. They often have bad days, but they've adjusted and they're getting on with their lives. This is some stages I really like, and I missed one when I was with. I'll go through them, but I missed one when I was putting the slide together. Erickson was a guy that followed after Freud and said that we all have these developmental stages we go through in life, which we have to master. The first year and a half of life, we learn to trust people. If you have decent parenting, you learn your mom's going to go away, but she's going to come back. So you learn trust. In the terrible twos, you learn that's the one I missed. Autonomy. And they all have a downside. Autonomy versus shame and doubt. So you learn, the toileting, and you learn that you can say no, and so on like that. Initiative, kind of 4 to 5, 6 age, you learn to play by yourself. In elementary school, you learn to study and be rewarded for it. In your teens, you break away from your family and become, develop an identity where your peers are more important. Intimacy, intimate relationships, productivity, having a career, and then later in life, integrity versus despair, where you're looking back, as I'm starting to do, on your life and trying to make sense of it, and seeing that it has some worth and integrity. You can look at that with a spinal cord injured guy. The first thing, you're in a total state of shock, and several of the theories involve the actual word shock. First of all, you might be in spinal shock, so you will be in spinal shock. So you don't know what you're going to get back. But the whole shock of the thing, one minute, like Ryan, you day after you graduated high school, you're going to Steamboat Springs, and then you're suddenly looking up at these white tiles and bright lights, and you know the shock of all that. Learning, coming to a point where you trust that, okay, there's light at the end of the tunnel, and I think as a team of PTOTs, you know, social work, doctor, nursing, that our job is to create a milieu that fosters trust. That okay, you know, it's terrible right now, but you're going to get through this. And I think nurses' aides are really important in that setting too, because they're doing the stuff that, you know, the intimate stuff that nobody ever expected you'd have to have done for you, and doing it and making you feel like a person at the same time, but when you're feeling perhaps anything but. So that then autonomy, actually getting to a point where you can either do your own care or direct your own care. You'll often see with the able-bodied population, all this, if somebody's had a problem in some area of one of these stages, that they might always have a problem with that when they face traumatic or really stressful situation. You know, somebody that's not had that good parenting, for instance, oftentimes doesn't have the ability to trust people. So anyway, Erickson had said that anytime you hit a crisis in your life, whether it's losing a job or losing a person or certainly an SCI, that you have to kind of go through these stages again. So then initiative, you see somebody, a quad in a power chair over there for the first time, you know, going around, and it's the first time in 2 months that they've been that far away from somebody. Then industry, of course, would be working with you guys in therapies, and an identity, developing an identity which includes the wheelchair or whatever the disability is, and then going on to intimate relationships and becoming productive again. And I always like that as a way of looking at adjustment.
Erickson had the stage of generativity.
Yeah, generativity is the last one. Yeah. And this is one this one is just one I put together that I think the people that adjust well, as you might expect, have good pre-injury coping skills and great family support, and developing a network so I encourage people to get back to normalizing their lives as soon as they can, whether it's getting back into school or social stuff. Actually, there is a limit to that as far as people that say, okay, I'm going to get back to work, and really, I always say, look, your job right now for the first year is to see when you get back, and see how independent you can get, because you're going to hit a wall if you try and go back to work in 4 or 5 months. So transportation, which I already mentioned, therapies and sports, those things. So those 3 items, I think, contribute to, perhaps most important in contributing to a good adjustment. Oh yes, so this is shock and denial. I think withdrawal is what I was talking about in regards to the group, that the people who are in the withdrawal phase, whether they've got transportation or not, aren't going to want to come to, they're not ready to come to a group and see guys that are really getting on with their lives. It's too painful for them. Sometimes I'll bring new injured guys down to the group, And some of them really enjoy it. Other people, again, it's the, I'm not ready to identify with this, no matter how well these guys are doing. Or it's like, I can never get there, or I don't want to think about this, I'm going to walk out of here. So it doesn't always work, but a lot of people get a lot out of it just because of the nature of the great guys I have in this group that are really well adjusted and can talk about the difficult issues and the good issues. When I'm doing any class or anything like with these guys, it shouldn't be this way, but it always seems to me that it kind of falls on the disabled person to let the people in their lives know that they are okay. And then everybody relaxes and doesn't see the wheelchair. And you can see actually people after, there's a key moment when people come back as outpatients, where you can see they're starting to incorporate the wheelchair into their identity, and they're starting to care about the way they dress and make up and so on like that. So, but what we have to, a lot of these guys especially are injured doing dangerous things, and they're used to, they're kind of people that use their bodies to express who they are, and they may not be great communicators. And when you're in a wheelchair, especially if you're going to be directing somebody to help you with your care, you have to develop communication skills and assertiveness training and all that, where you know, if you've got an attendant you're relying on, you can't be, you know, berating them, but you've got to let your needs be known, and we've got some videotapes we showed people on that. But another way of looking at assertiveness is this transactional analysis was a theory of another psychological theory that was in vogue several years ago here, and it's kind of gone out of vogue, but it's now still popular in Europe and Asia and Australia. And, in fact, my sister in London is one of the big teachers of TA in England. So one of their basic tenets is that we all have, as adults, these three states of ego states, they call them: the parent, the adult, and the child. And we're constantly, as adults, changing between those states. The parent being our values and our philosophy and rules we have about life that we learn growing up from our parents and other authority figures. And they break it into two. You've got the nurturing, what I call the good enough parent, and then you've got the critical parent, where we remind ourselves of critical authority figures. And and then you have the adult, which is dealing with what's going on here, what we're, you know, more or less in the present. And then the child, they also divide into two: the spontaneous child that we hopefully all take into adulthood, where we you know, can be spontaneous and laugh and so on. And then the feeling child, which is left over, generally bad feelings left over from childhood, not feeling sadness and upset. And there's nothing like, if we all have these patterns, you know, I think people end up with a pattern of how we feel in crisis situations, stressful situations, like I'm not doing well enough, I should be doing more. And you could see how that pattern, if you had it, and you have a spinal cord injury and you can't do very much of anything, how riveting that would be. But it would, you have to get people into the present and say, okay, well, we'll just let one day at a time, let's take this as we go. And because I think people respond out of I guess that's not true of this situation, but when we encounter something that's similar to past times where we felt terrible, we bring those accumulated events, the feeling from them, into the current situation and maybe respond out of proportion with what the event might be. So if you're just home from the the center, and it takes you 3 or 4 hours to get ready because you haven't got a routine down, and you have to say no just to people about functions or, you know, events that you have to call in and say, I just can't make it. That might trigger all those old memories of that you know. So anyway, you've got those 3 states, and you've got your critical parent beating up on your own child, but then you bring in other people into it, and when you first become injured, you're dealing with a lot of people in their parent, hopefully a supportive parent, but nevertheless, you know, whether it's doctors, therapists, whoever, and even family members take on this parental role with you, and as long as you respond like a patient little person, like a patient, that can go on indefinitely. But what we're trying to do in rehab is get people back into their adult, so they're directing their own care, so that their relationships are collegial with us, rather than, you know, we're doing for them or telling them what to do. So I think that might be a helpful one too. Oh, that's the assertiveness training basic, is that we're teaching people not to be passive about directing their care, not to get aggressive, but find some middle ground where they're able to get their needs known without running over people. And this is just something from in terms of using oneself as a therapist or a social worker or anything else, might be helpful in dealing with patients. The transference and counter-transference issues. I remember in my, I think, first year or two of charge, I got an English guy from Liverpool who had actually played soccer for Liverpool, and everybody goes up in England wanting to play soccer for Liverpool or Manchester United or somebody like that. And so I was really taking him home with me at night. I just couldn't, you know. So that's counter-transference, where you're drawn to the person out of your own issues, and the transference that goes on is what I was talking about earlier, where people fixate or really identify you as the person that can make them walk and get you out of here. And so sensing if that's going on can be helpful. You know, letting them know that you're human and you're not a miracle worker and all that. So yeah, that was about. And those are the conclusions. And then the other model which I have here is uses a 5-stage model, and you can see how they're all interrelated. So shock, which I covered, the realization. This was actually put together myself and Claire Jones, who was our director, who was a rehab counselor. His background was in rehab counseling, which unfortunately we don't have a rehab counseling department now. It was just, I guess it was a budget issue, but it was really sad. We even had a work hardening program on the whole Sharp campus. People would be slotted into jobs and punch a clock or whatever, especially with brain injured people. They really got, they got coached and so on. We still have I have a good relationship with the Department of Voc Rehab through the state, and they can be very helpful in terms of getting people back to work when they're ready. They can pay for hand controls, they can pay for adjusting the job site, and pay for training, getting to and from school. So that's a real great resource for people, because only I don't know what percentage actually, but there's a fairly small percentage of people, as you can imagine, can go back to the job that they had before. luckily so many people work with computers now that that's probably a larger figure because people can go back to obviously computer jobs. So we got shock, so realization. I'm going to give you this, but I'll just whip through it here. So shock, obviously, just supporting them through it. The realization of what's going on, but still mainly in denial of it. So just allowing them to talk about what they're going through. Don't confront the denial. Let's see, and it also includes what the family might be doing. Then we've got acknowledgement. So on. Realization, defensive retreat, which would be along with the withdrawal phase in some of the other models, and then the adaptation is the last one, and then the acknowledgement, which is where depression might be. So you can see how this might parallel a little bit with Kubler-Ross and so on. So I'll just leave this outline for you. Sorry, I should have said, but any questions along the way, or yeah.
Actually, a question. It says up here, adjustment theories are useful in educating patients and families. And I know you mentioned something about a men's group. So I'm curious if patients are often seeing psychologists, or do they, have these meetings with someone like you, social workers, or kind of how does that work for them?
Well, we had at Sharp a larger psychology department, more focused on clinical psychology, and now they've shifted to do more neuropsychology, which is particularly useful with stroke and brain injury, but not that useful with spinal cord injury, where they will do testing to see what their capabilities and what the best ways of working with people. And some very often, well, not often, but often enough, there's a concurrent minor brain injury, if you can imagine, that never gets really maybe even addressed because the spinal cord injury is the thing. So sometimes they'll test them, and sometimes they'll do some support. We do some support too, supportive counseling. These guys that have hurt skiing or whatever they might be doing are generally a population that would never have sought out insight-oriented psychology. So I always approach them on a kind of very indirect way. But I do see some people for more in-depth stuff. But I think getting them in this men's group has been unique for me because I tried groups before early on. I found that I do another group which is actually for all disabilities that is called a drama focus. It's a lot of support that develops where we work on plays, writing plays, and doing musicals for groups in the community. And what happens, I think, it's really effective is the support. There's a number of great things about it. It deals with being more extroverted, which you have to become, I think, if you let your needs be known if you're disabled, and also deals with speech issues, but also people with one disability are helping out people that have a totally different set of problems. But what was the main reason I was going to say? It's the main good thing I was going to say is related to what we're talking about. It'll come to me. But, what I was going to say was, we're working on shows and we're working on writing, and we're not necessarily talking about how dreadful this whole process is. And that's why the rec stuff, there's a tremendous amount of support that develops through playing lacrosse or whatever, there's guys. But it's amazing how important, I had somebody in the group about 3 years ago who'd already been injured for way over a year, but had been rehabbed in a facility where there was no other spinal cord injured people, and he was so far behind his wife had to take off work to get him there, and I had to sign off for her to get off work. And this was close to 2 years, I think. And he hadn't thought about a vehicle, and to see him change through this, being nagged by these guys to get his act together. Now he's driving, he's doing a bunch of stuff, and he's been perhaps the most glaring example of this, the power of peer support.
Peer pressure, sounds like too.
Peer pressure, yeah. So, did I answer your question about the support? Yeah. So, yeah, they would never have chosen to be in psychotherapy.
Sometimes I think therapists are pretty uncomfortable when someone's in so much pain or grief or anger or shock or depression that they just want to make somebody feel better. And so
Yeah.
sometimes I think we kind of put on a happy face, or it's not going to be that bad, or I'll have to get past it. Or I'm wondering if you have some things that we should not do, like do's and don'ts.
There's a certain amount of stuff you guys have to get done. I mean, you can't, although people do, therapists do occasionally, just spend their whole time listening to somebody saying, and saying how difficult it all is. But oftentimes you do have to move them along. I think keeping them in the present, let's work on things we can get accomplished. It is just reassuring them the whole thing that things are going to get better, but without candy coping, without there's going to be hard times, but things will get better. And I think I've been working there long enough and seen people adjust enough that I can say that with some degree of certainty. With most people, I think some people can't do it, and there's always people that say, well, I don't. I'm just going to go back to. My body's going to keep up with me, and they end up, going on road trips and not doing a single pressure relief and ending up with skin decubiti and so being down for months, and that's a harsh reality. That's a big problem for especially quads. As I'm sure you probably learned, the skin problems and taking care of your skin because of the circulation being so limited. And I have a wonderful story actually of, this is just one of many I could tell you, but there's a guy that just died, but he was injured when he was 17. He made it to 70, so he was in a chair for 53 years, quad, and he was involved, and there was a big movement in the 70s in Berkeley, started out in Berkeley, the kind of independent living movement, and he was part of that, and then he moved down to San Diego, and I helped him a little bit get started, and became friends with him, and then in the late 80s, he developed a horrible skin breakdown. And he had the flap surgery where you go in and take a flap from a piece of skin to someone and do a flap. He was supposed to be down for 6 or 8 weeks. He was living on the freeway, Highway 5 in Old Town. In fact, I'd given him Jackson Browne's CD, I'm going to live my life in the shade of the freeway, I remember. And then so he ended up being down for 2 years. He tried to get up, instead of 8 weeks, it was 2 years, and he was stuck in this apartment with a live-in attendants. And I went down a few times, not as much as I should probably, and the place was just, people were ripping him off, and the smell of urine, and it was just awful. And then about the time he started getting up, he met a woman, and who was, I guess, working at a residential place for the developmentally disabled, and one of the parents really liked her and gave her all this antique furniture, and she moved in with him, and it was like Christmas. It was a Christmas tree. I went over to see them, all this antique furniture. They're totally in love with. And then I was able to give him a job because he had an MFT from his time at Berkeley, and a part-time job, and they ended up moving to Albuquerque, and finally they ended up getting married. There's huge disincentives to getting married if you're on benefits, as you may not know. Because once you get married, if your spouse is working, their income is taken into account, and if you need attendant care, you get, you know, if you're within a certain income level, you get help with that, and you may take you out of that. So they said to hell with it. Anyway, they've had a wonderful several years, and I went down to Albuquerque for the wedding. Nice event. So, anybody else? That's about. Nice to meet you all.
What do you think, if you have to pick out something that you felt was crucial for someone to have, either their background, or their skill, or their attitude, or their experience, what would you say is really critical to someone to having them, to helping them finish the book and move on, you know, and succeed that way? Like with Ryan, like he had very strong faith in God.
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't know if, can you speak to how people's faith affects their recovery?
Yeah, I mean, I really believe that it seems to me that people that have a strong faith do better. And I didn't mention that, but I do think that are you talking about the patients themselves or
Yes.
you? Yeah.
Yes.
Not pushing people away, keeping them, you know, involved in their family. Yeah. Developing goals for the future, and not getting stuck. You know, the people that can say, "I'm really sad, and depressed about this, but I'm going to not literally put one foot in front of the other and keep going because I know it'll get me somewhere where it'll be better." So motivation would be a big, just general overall motivation. And as the therapist, I think the ability to motivate is a huge. I can look at our therapists and look at the ones that I like the best, and not just great clinicians, but they really have an ability to attach and get people moving, whereas others maybe over the years haven't. You know. So.
Any other questions for us, Peter?
Nice to meet you all.
Well, thank you so
Thanks.
much.